The trap was already laid by the time my son walked through my front door that Thanksgiving morning. He just didn't know it yet. Neither did his wife. Neither did her parents, who'd been told to wait in the car until they were called in. That detail still bothers me, even now. Like livestock waiting for the gate to open. My name is Constance, and I'll be 71 in February. I live in a house on a quiet street in Savannah, 3 blocks off Forsyth Park. The kind of street where the live oaks meet in the middle and the Spanish moss hangs low enough to brush the roof of the mailman's truck. My husband Theodore and I bought this house in 1978 for $41,000. He was a cardiologist at Memorial. I taught American literature at Armstrong State for 34 years. We raised 1 boy in this house, and we buried Theodore from this house, and I had every intention of dying in this house too. That was the part my son couldn't accept. His name is Bennett. He's 43 years old. He's a partner at a commercial real estate firm in Atlanta, makes good money, drives a car I don't understand the price of. He married a woman named Whitney 6 years ago at a vineyard in North Carolina that cost more than my first house. Whitney is 36, runs a wellness brand on Instagram, and has never once called me by my first name. She calls me Mama C in front of other people and nothing at all when it's just us. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Bennett called me at 4 in the afternoon. I was in the garden, deadheading the last of the chrysanthemums. The phone was in my apron pocket, and I almost didn't answer because my knees were aching and I knew if I sat down on the porch swing, I wouldn't get back up for an hour. "Mama," he said, "we need to talk about something before we get there tomorrow." I should have known then. He hadn't called me Mama since he was 9 years old. It was Mum from then on. Sometimes Mother. When he was being formal, never Mama. Mama was a button he was pressing. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Whitney's parents are going to be moving down to Savannah after the holidays. We've been talking about it for a while. Her dad's lungs aren't great, and the Pittsburgh winters are killing him. That's nice for them. Are they buying down here?" There was a pause. I remember I picked a brown chrysanthemum head off and crushed it between my fingers, and the petals fell apart like wet paper. "Well, that's the thing. They're not really in a position to buy. Whitney and I were thinking, you've got that whole house, 4 bedrooms, 2 of them just sitting empty, and you're alone there and Bennett." "Just hear me out, Mama. They're great people. You've met them, and you're rattling around in that big house by yourself, and Whitney's been worried about you. We've both been worried, and this would just make sense for everybody." I sat down on the porch swing. My knees won that round. "You want her parents to live in my house, live with you, keep you company, help with things around the house. Her dad was a contractor. He can fix anything, and her mum is the sweetest cook. You'd never have to make a meal again." "I like making my meals, Bennett." "Mama, just think about it. Don't say no yet. We'll talk tomorrow. They're coming for Thanksgiving so we can all sit down together, as a family." He hung up before I could say anything else. The Spanish moss was moving in the breeze, and I remember thinking it looked like somebody pulling at it from underneath. I went inside and called Margaret Cho. Margaret has been my attorney for 22 years. She drew up Theodore's will when he got the diagnosis, and she handled the estate when he passed in 2019. And she has watched my son from a careful distance the whole time. Margaret is 64, sharp as a paring knife, and she answered on the second ring. "He finally did it, didn't he?" she said. "How did you know?" "Constance, I've been waiting for this call for a year." "Tell me what he said." I told her. She let me get all the way through it without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about Margaret. When I was finished, she said, "Are you alone in the house right now?" "Yes." "Good. Listen carefully. I want you to do exactly what I'm about to tell you, and I want you to do it tonight." She told me to drive to her office the next morning, Thanksgiving morning, before my son arrived. She would have papers ready. She had drafted them 6 months ago, the last time Bennett made what she called a probing remark about the house at my birthday lunch. She had been waiting. I want to be honest about something. I had not been blindsided. That's what the story would prefer, the version where the sweet old grandmother gets ambushed and rises up at the last minute. The truth is uglier and slower. Theodore had been gone for 4 years, and in that time I had watched my son change in small ways, the way you watch a houseplant lose colour over a season and tell yourself it'll bounce back in spring. The Christmas after Theodore died, Bennett asked me if I'd thought about downsizing. 3 months later, he asked if I'd put him on the deed just in case. A year after that, Whitney started sending me articles about senior living facilities in Atlanta. For when you're ready. I had been ready for this Thanksgiving for a long time. That night, I did 3 things. I changed the locks, which I had a locksmith come out and do at 7 in the evening after he closed his shop, because I paid him in cash to do it after hours. I checked every camera in the house. I have 8 of them, installed 2 years ago by a company my late husband's cousin runs out of Charleston. They cover every doorway, the foyer, the living room, the dining room, Theodore's old study, and the safe in the master closet. The only people who knew about the cameras were me, the cousin, and Margaret. Bennett did not know. Whitney did not know. I'd never mentioned them, never gestured to them, never had a reason to. The third thing I did was pack a bag. Pajamas, a change of clothes, my heart pills, my reading glasses, the photograph of Theodore that sits on my nightstand, and a paperback copy of The Optimist's Daughter that I'd been meaning to reread. I put the bag in the trunk of my car. Then I went to bed. Thanksgiving morning, I drove to Margaret's office at 8 a.m. She met me in the parking lot, in slacks and a sweater, her hair still damp from the shower. We sat in her office for an hour, and I signed 11 documents. The most important one was the new will, which left the house and the bulk of the estate to a trust in Theodore's name, the proceeds of which would fund a scholarship at Armstrong for first-generation college students studying nursing. Bennett's portion was reduced to a single sum, modest, the kind of inheritance a son receives from a mother he was kind to. The second most important document was a no-contest clause that would void even that sum if he tried to challenge any part of the will in court. "You're sure?" she said when I'd signed the last one. "I'm sure. Constance, I have to ask, if today doesn't go the way you think it will, if he surprises you, if he and Whitney sit down and behave themselves and turn out to be reasonable people, are you going to want to undo this? If they sit down and behave themselves, I won't have to." She nodded. She walked me to my car. Before I drove off, she said, "Don't go back to the house tonight, no matter what happens. Drive to the mansion on Forsyth and check in. I've already booked you a room under my name." I drove home to make the turkey. They arrived at 1 in the afternoon. Bennett came in first, hugged me too long, told me I looked tired. Whitney came in second, carrying a casserole dish I knew she hadn't cooked, kissed the air beside both of my cheeks. Behind her came her parents, Roland and Diane, whom I had met exactly twice before, at the wedding and at a baby shower for Whitney's sister. Roland is a big man, was bigger before his lungs went, and he came in coughing into a handkerchief and looking around my foyer with the kind of slow appraisal a man gives a piece of property he's about to put a bid on. Diane is a small woman with a hard mouth. She didn't say hello. She handed me a bottle of wine and said, "Where should I put my coat?" I hung their coats. I poured drinks. I served the appetizers Whitney had brought, none of which I would have chosen, all of them photographed by her before anyone touched them. Bennett kept looking at me, waiting for an opening. He drank 2 glasses of bourbon before we sat down to eat, which was unusual for him. My son does not drink the way his father did, which is to say, my son drinks when he is afraid. We sat down at 3. The dining room was set the way it has always been set on holidays. Theodore's mother's china, the silver Theodore's father gave us for our 10th anniversary, the cream-coloured linen napkins I have ironed myself for 40 years. I lit the candles. I said grace. I served the turkey. The conversation stayed surface for about 20 minutes. Whitney talked about a yoga retreat in Tulum. Roland talked about how the Steelers were doing. Diane didn't talk at all. Bennett ate quickly, the way a child eats when he's been told he can't get up until he finishes. Then he set his fork down. I knew it was coming the second the fork hit the plate. "Mama, I wanted us to talk about Roland Diane's situation while we're all here together." I kept eating. They've been having a really hard time up north. Roland's OPD has gotten a lot worse, and the cost of living up there with Pittsburgh property taxes the way they are, it just isn't sustainable for them anymore. Whitney and I have been talking, and we think the best thing for everybody is for them to come live here, with you in the house. There's plenty of room. They'd have their own space, and it would give us a lot of peace of mind knowing you weren't alone. I set down my own fork. I patted my mouth with the napkin. I looked at each of them in turn. Roland was watching his plate. Diane was watching me. Whitney was watching Bennett. Bennett was watching the chandelier. No, I said. The word sat there in the middle of the table like a serving dish nobody wanted to touch. Mama, no, Bennett. I'm sorry, I won't be doing that. You haven't even thought about it. I have thought about it. I thought about it Wednesday, and Wednesday night, and yesterday, and this morning. I have thought about very little else. The answer is no. I don't want roommates. I don't want strangers in this house. I don't want to give up Theodore's study or the guest rooms where my friends stay when they visit. I am sorry that Roland is having a hard time, but my home is not the solution to that hard time. Strangers, Whitney said. The word came out of her mouth like a coin she was spitting up. Whitney, I'm sorry. I have met your parents twice. I don't dislike them. I don't know them well enough to dislike them. They are not my family. They are your family. I have my own life in this house, and I am not going to surrender it. Mama, I sound clear, Bennett. I sound like I know what I want. Whitney pushed back from the table. I want to record exactly what she said next, because for a long time afterward I worried I had imagined it, and the cameras have shown me that I did not. You selfish old woman. I did not respond. You are sitting on $1 million house by yourself, while my parents are choking to death in a row home in Pittsburgh, and you can't be bothered to share a hallway. You haven't worked in 15 years. You don't even use most of these rooms. My father is a sick man. My father is a sick man, and you have the nerve, Whitney. That was Bennett. Quiet, not a stop, an encouragement to continue. She picked up her wine glass. It was full. She had refilled it twice during dinner, and I had noticed each time. She stood up. The chair scraped against the floor in a way I'll hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. And then she threw the wine. She didn't throw the glass. She threw the contents. Most of it caught me across the face and the front of my dress. A Marian Anderson navy blue with cream piping that Theodore had bought for me at Saks in 1995. The wine was a Cabernet. I felt it on my eyelashes. I felt it run down inside my collar. The glass came next. She was halfway to throwing the glass too, when Bennett stood up to grab her arm, and the glass slipped, and it hit the edge of the dining table and shattered, and a piece of the stem came up off the table and caught me on the cheek, just under my left eye. I felt it before I knew what had happened. There was a hot, slow opening on my face, and then I felt the blood, and then I saw the blood on my hand when I touched it. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. It was probably 4 seconds. Roland was the first to speak. He said, "Jesus Christ, Whitney." Diane said, "She provoked her." Bennett said, "Mama, are you Mama? Let me see." I stood up. Slowly, because my knees did not want to. I picked up my napkin and pressed it to my cheek. "I'm going to the emergency room," I said. "I would like all of you to leave my house." "Mama, I'm driving you." "You are not driving me anywhere, Bennett. You are leaving, all 4 of you, now." "Mama, you can't drive yourself like that. You're bleeding, let me at least. I have called for a car. It is on its way. You will leave my house, Bennett. You will take your wife, and you will take her parents, and you will get out of my house." He looked at me. I want to be clear because this is the part I have replayed the most. He looked at me, and there was a window of about 3 seconds in which I watched him calculate. I watched him calculate. He could come with me to the hospital, hold my hand, do the thing a son does, or he could stay. He stayed. "Mama, can we just talk about this when you get back? Get out, Bennett." I walked out of the dining room with the napkin pressed to my face. I walked through the foyer, picked up my purse from the console where I'd left it, and walked out the front door. I shut it behind me. I locked it from the outside with the new key the locksmith had cut for me the night before, the only key besides Margaret's. I stood on the porch. I called the car. I waited. While I waited, I sent Margaret a single text message. "It happened. I'm going to Memorial. Cameras are rolling. Send everyone." She wrote back, "On my way. Don't talk to anyone but the doctor." The car came. I got in. I optioned the driver to take me to Memorial. He looked at my face in the mirror and asked if I was all right, and I said yes, and he didn't ask anything else, which I appreciated. At Memorial, they took me back almost immediately. The cut was deep enough to need 11 stitches. The plastic surgeon on call, a woman maybe 35 years old, was very gentle and very angry on my behalf, and asked me 3 different times in 3 different ways whether I felt safe going home that night. I told her the truth, which was that I had a hotel room booked and an attorney on the way and a plan in motion. She said good. She said she had seen too many women my age who didn't have any of those things. While she was stitching me up, I opened the camera app on my phone. I had not looked at it during the dinner. I had not looked at it on the porch. I had not looked at it in the car. I looked at it now, with my face numb and my cheek being closed up by a stranger. They had not left. I want to say that again because it is the part of this story that I cannot stop returning to. I had told my son to leave my house. I had locked the front door, and he had not left. The cameras showed all 4 of them still in the dining room. They were standing up. Whitney was crying, but it was the wrong kind of crying, the kind that comes from being caught instead of being sorry. Roland was on his phone. Diane was opening drawers in the sideboard. I switched cameras. The kitchen camera showed Bennett going through the drawer where I keep takeout menus and old receipts. He was looking for something. I switched to the study. Empty. I switched back to the dining room. Whitney had stopped crying. She was talking fast to Bennett, gesturing toward the staircase. Bennett shook his head. She gestured again, harder. He walked toward the stairs. I switched to the upstairs hallway camera. I watched my 43-year-old son walk down the hall of the house I raised him in, past the framed photograph of him at his Eagle Scout ceremony, past the photograph of his father holding him on the day he was born, and into my bedroom. Theodore's bedroom. Our bedroom. Our bedroom. I watched him go to the closet. I watched him kneel down and pull aside the row of Theodore's old suits which I have never been able to bring myself to give away, and try the safe. He didn't have the combination. The safe had been Theodore's. The combination had been changed 2 months after Theodore died, the day Margaret asked me whether Bennett knew it. I had said yes, and she had said change it. He tried 4 times. Then he stood up and kicked the closet door, which is a behavior I have not seen from him since he was 16 years old, and got cut from the varsity baseball team. I called the Savannah Police Department from the hospital bed. I told them that I had returned home from the hospital to find my house had been broken into, that the perpetrators were still inside, that I had video evidence, and that I needed officers dispatched immediately. The dispatcher asked if I was inside the house, and I said no. She asked where I was, and I said I was watching from a remote location. She said officers were on the way. Margaret arrived at the hospital 10 minutes later. She had with her a young paralegal whose name I did not catch, and a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. She pulled a chair up next to my bed and said, "Show me the cameras." We watched together. By that point, Whitney was upstairs too. She was in the room that had been Bennett's growing up, which I had converted to a sewing room after he left for college. She was opening boxes. Roland was still in the dining room, sitting now, wheezing into his handkerchief. Diane was in the kitchen going through my pantry as if she expected to find a deed inside a box of grits. "Constance," Margaret said, "I want you to know something. From this moment forward, every minute that footage continues to roll is another count against him. They are trespassing. They are committing burglary. The moment your son tried that safe, he became something the law has a name for." "I know. Are you ready for what comes next?" I have been ready since the Christmas after Theodore died. The police arrived at the house at 4:30. The cameras have audio. I have watched the footage many times since, and I have only been able to make it all the way through twice. Bennett opened the door because he thought it was me coming back. The look on his face when he saw the uniforms is something I would like to forget, and cannot. He tried to explain. He said he was the homeowner's son. He said he was checking on the property. He said his mother had had an accident at dinner, and he was waiting for her to come home. The officer asked if his mother had given him permission to be in the house. He said yes. The officer asked if his mother was reachable. He said yes. The officer asked him to call her. My phone rang. Margaret put her finger to her lips. I let it ring out. The officer asked Bennett to step outside. Whitney came down the stairs holding a manila envelope she had pulled out of a box in the sewing room. The envelope was empty. She had been hoping it wasn't. The officer asked her to step outside too. Roland stayed in the dining room because he could barely stand. Diane started yelling at the second officer. who was very young and very calm and very good at his job. Margaret called the lead officer's cell phone. They had spoken before she came to the hospital. She told him I was in the emergency room and would not be returning to the house tonight, that I was pressing charges for assault against my daughter-in-law and trespassing against all four of them, and that she would meet him at the precinct in the morning with the camera footage. She told him to inform my son that any attempt to contact me directly would be treated as a violation of the protective order I would be filing first thing Monday morning. I did not return home that night. I slept at the mansion on Forsyth, in a room that smelled like fresh linens and somebody else's perfume, with a bandage on my face and an ice pack on my swollen knee. I read 4 chapters of The Optimist's Daughter. I cried twice. I slept 8 hours, which is more than I usually sleep. The next morning, Margaret came to the hotel with coffee and pastries and the rest of the documents. We went through everything. The new will was already filed. The trust was already in motion. The protective order would be filed Monday. The criminal charges would proceed on the timeline of the Chatham County District Attorney's Office, which Margaret estimated at 6 to 9 months. The hardest part is going to be the next phone call, she said. From him. From him. He called 16 times that Friday. I did not answer. He called 11 times on Saturday. I did not answer. On Sunday morning, he sent me a long text message which I have saved but will not transcribe here, which apologized for nothing and explained everything, and which ended with the words, "I think we both said things we regret, and I want to come home and talk about this like adults." I forwarded it to Margaret. She forwarded it to the district attorney. I went home Sunday afternoon. The house was exactly as I had left it on Thanksgiving morning, except for the dining room, which the police had photographed and which I cleaned myself. I picked up the pieces of the wine glass with my bare hands, and I cried, and I put them in a paper bag and walked them to the trash can at the end of the driveway. I washed Theodore's mother's china. I ironed the linen napkins, even the one with the bloodstain which did not come out and which I have kept folded in a drawer. Whitney was charged with simple assault. She pled down to disorderly conduct and a fine. Bennett was not charged criminally because the burglary count required intent that the district attorney did not feel he could prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury that would see a son in his mother's house. Margaret was disappointed. I was not. I had not wanted my son in jail. I had wanted my son to know with certainty in writing in court that what he had done had a name. The protective order was granted. It is good for 2 years. He has not contacted me directly since the day it was granted, though he has sent 2 letters through Margaret, both of which I have read and neither of which I have answered. The will stands. The trust stands. The scholarship at Armstrong opened for applications last spring, and the first recipient, a young woman from Garden City whose mother is an LPN at Memorial, started classes in August. Her name is Adaeze. I had her over for tea in October. She sat in Theodore's chair in the front parlour, and she asked me about him. Really asked. The way young people do when they actually want to know. I told her he was a good man who saved a lot of lives and who was kind to me every day for 46 years. She cried a little. I did too. The house is quiet now. It is a quiet I chose. The Spanish moss is still moving in the breeze outside the window, and the live oaks are still meeting in the middle of the street, and I am still here. I think about my son sometimes. I think about him a lot, actually, and I would be lying if I told you any other answer. I think about the boy I taught to ride a bicycle in the alley behind this house in 1986. I think about the 16-year-old who got cut from varsity baseball and kicked the closet door. I think about the man in the surveillance footage, kneeling in front of his father's safe, and I try to find the line between those 3 people, and I cannot find it, and I have stopped looking. What I have not stopped doing is loving him. That is the part nobody who hears this story understands, and I have stopped trying to explain it. A mother's love does not turn off when a son becomes a stranger. It just stops being a thing he can spend. He sent a card this past Mother's Day. Margaret intercepted it and asked if I wanted to read it. I said no. Then I said yes. It said I miss you and nothing else. I keep it in the drawer with the blood-stained napkin. I don't know what that means. I am 70, almost 71 years old, and I have stopped pretending I know what everything means. What I know is this. The house is mine. The decisions are mine. The quiet is mine. And on the wall above the mantel, where Theodore's photograph hangs, I have added a small framed quote that I copied out by hand last winter. It says, "Your mother's love is unconditional. Your mother's house is not." I look at it every morning when I drink my coffee. I don't regret a single thing. I have thought about that Thanksgiving every single day since it happened, and I have come to believe that nothing about it was an accident. Not the way Bennett called me Mama on the phone, a word he had not used in 30 years. Not the way Whitney refilled her wine glass twice before dinner was even served. Not the way Roland and Diane sat in my dining room like buyers at an open house. None of it fell from the sky. It was built, brick by brick, over 4 years, by people who had decided that my widowhood was an opportunity instead of a wound. And the moment I understood that, the moment I stopped pretending the chrysanthemums would bounce back in spring, I stopped being a victim of the story and started being its author. There is a kind of strength that comes from kindness, and there is a kind that comes from clarity. And at 70 years old, I have learned that they are not the same thing. I loved my son when he was a boy, and I love him now. And that love did not save him from himself, because love by itself never has. What saved me was the second kind of strength. The kind that calls Margaret on a Wednesday afternoon. The kind that changes the locks at 7 in the evening and pays the locksmith in cash. The kind that packs a bag and books a hotel room and signs 11 documents on Thanksgiving morning before the turkey goes in the oven. That is not coldness. That is the warmest thing I have ever done for myself, because the woman who did it was the same woman Theodore married in 1976, the same woman who taught American literature for 34 years, the same woman who buried her husband and kept getting up the next morning. She was still in there. Bennett had counted on her being gone. She wasn't. What I want any woman my age to know, any woman watching this with a son who has started circling, any woman who has been told she is selfish for wanting to keep what is hers, is that you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your children are not entitled to your home because you carried them inside it. Your kindness is not a deed they can transfer. And the line between generous and exploited is not a line anyone else gets to draw for you. I am not bitter. I want to say that plainly. Bitterness is a house guest I refuse to let move in too. I am clear, and I am quiet, and I am still here in the house Theodore, and I bought in 1978, and the Spanish moss is still moving outside the window, and I drink my coffee every morning under a small framed quote that reminds me of the only thing I needed to learn late in life. A mother's love is unconditional. A mother's house is not. And the moment I made peace with that distinction, my whole life got bigger again.